Welcome to our deep dive, everybody. Today we're looking into agroecology, and we're going to unpack, those core principles, the things that really set this approach to agriculture apart,
Hmm.
and honestly make it so promising in a world, a world facing all those food security and environmental challenges.
You're spot on with that promising. What's really interesting about agroecology, I think, is that it's not just focused on growing food.
I
It's aiming to create this whole system that's sustainable and beneficial, like on multiple levels. It's ecological, social, and economic, all kind of intertwined. Yeah.
already picking up on that. Sounds
Yeah.
like this is going to be more than just like a how-to on farming.
Yeah.
Our source material really does point to this interconnectedness,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to those ecological principles of agroecology.
You got it. It's about understanding those fundamental relationships in nature and then designing these agricultural systems that actually work with those natural processes, not against them. So we start with biodiversity.
Right. And a lot of people hear biodiversity and they're probably thinking, oh, it just means having a pretty farm with lots of different plants and animals, but it goes much deeper than that.
It does. It's about building resilience into the system. If you think about it, a monoculture, so a field with just one type of crop, is way more vulnerable to pests, to diseases, even those extreme weather events. But when you increase the biodiversity, you're actually creating this complex web of interactions that makes the whole system as a whole more stable.
So it's kind of like diversifying your investments. You're spreading the risk out and making like a safety net for the whole system.
That's a great analogy. And that leads to better pest control, because beneficial insects and all these other organisms have habitats right there within the farm. And pollination is going to improve because you've got a wider variety of flowering plants that are attracting those pollinators. And then the system is, it's better able to handle climate change because all those diverse species have different varying tolerances to temperature and rainfall fluctuations.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. It's like you're building a self-regulating system that can just adapt to changing conditions. Our source material also talks about ecosystem services, which, I'll be honest, always sounded a bit abstract to me.
Oh, I get that. It can seem a bit academic, but it's really about recognizing the tangible benefits, right? The benefits that those healthy ecosystems provide to us humans. You can think of it like nature's constantly working for us, providing all these services, and they're essential for our survival, for our
Yeah.
well-being.
Okay. You've got me intrigued. Break it down. What kind of services?
Well, there are four main categories. First, there's provisioning. These are the most obvious, like the food we eat, the water we drink, the raw materials we use for building, clothing, that kind of thing. Then there are regulating services, like how forests help regulate the climate, or wetlands, filter water, and prevent flooding.
I see. Yeah. I'm starting to see how a farm, or really any human activity, I guess, can either support or disrupt these services, right?
Exactly, and that's where agroecology comes in. It's about designing agricultural systems that enhance these services, not degrade them. So, for instance, healthy soil. Soil teeming with life plays a massive role in regulating those water cycles. It acts like this giant sponge, absorbing that rainfall, filtering it, and slowly releasing it back into the environment. So it benefits not just the farm itself, but the surrounding landscape and communities as well.
So we're not just like depleting the land, we're actually enriching it. It's a whole different way of thinking.
You got it. And that brings us to the third category of those ecosystem services. It's supporting services. These are the processes that underpin everything else, like nutrient cycling, the way that nature recycles, all those essential elements like nitrogen and phosphorus, or soil formation. That's that slow, intricate process of building healthy, fertile soil.
Okay, so these are like the invisible heroes, the behind-the-scenes workers, I guess, that make life possible.
Perfect. And finally, we have cultural services. These are the non-material benefits that nature provides. They're a little harder to quantify, but they're just as important. Think about like the aesthetic beauty of a landscape, or those recreational opportunities, right? The spiritual connection that people feel to certain places.
Wow, that's really eye-opening, this whole concept of ecosystem services. It's like seeing the world through a new lens or something. Now, where does natural resource management fit into all this?
Natural resource management, it's absolutely central to agroecology. Remember, we said agroecology is about working with nature. So we need to manage all those resources, soil, water, biodiversity, in a way that ensures their long-term health and productivity.
So it's about responsible stewardship, not exploitation.
Exactly. There are tons of innovative and traditional techniques that fall under this. Our source material highlights things like soil conservation, that involves techniques like cover cropping, no-till farming, and contour plowing to prevent erosion. It's all about improving that soil structure.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot about cover cropping lately. I think it's fascinating how planting a non-cash crop between seasons can improve the soil health and reduce the need for synthetic fertilizers.
It really is. It's a great example of how agroecology mimics natural processes, right?
Yeah.
In a forest, you never see bare soil. It's always covered with leaf litter or other vegetation. Cover cropping replicates that, so it protects the soil from erosion, adds organic matter, and provides habitat for all those beneficial organisms.
Right, right. And what about water management? That seems especially critical in a world, well, facing increasing water scarcity.
It's a major concern. Agroecology really emphasizes water harvesting techniques, like rainwater harvesting, which is basically collecting and storing rainwater so you can use it later. And then there's also a focus on using those drought-tolerant crop varieties, the ones that are already adapted to local conditions, so they need less irrigation.
And that's where the knowledge of traditional farming practices, I think, can be so valuable, right?
Absolutely. A lot of indigenous and traditional farming communities have developed such sophisticated water management systems over centuries of adapting to their local environments. Agroecology recognizes the importance of learning from these traditional practices and integrating them with a modern scientific understanding.
So we've got this solid foundation of ecological principles, but it sounds like agroecology doesn't stop there, right? It also addresses those social and economic dimensions of agriculture, which I've got to say is where things get really interesting, at least to me.
That's where we see that human element come into play. Agroecology recognizes that a truly sustainable food system has to be fair,
Yeah.
just, and economically viable
I
for
think
everyone involved.
our handbook makes it clear that fairness and equity are absolutely central
Yeah.
to agroecology. It's not just about environmental sustainability, it's about social justice as well.
Yes. And that means making sure there's equitable access to resources like land, water, and credit, especially for small-scale farmers and those marginalized communities who are often excluded from mainstream agricultural systems. It also means promoting fair trade practices that guarantee fair prices for farmers and workers, right?
Yeah, it's about creating a system where everyone benefits, not just a select few, right?
Exactly. And it's not just about the economics. It's about recognizing all those diverse roles and the knowledge that people bring to the food system. Women often play such a crucial role in food production and preparation, but their contributions are often overlooked or undervalued. Agroecology seeks to empower women and make sure that their voices are heard.
For sure. And what about accessibility? What's the point of sustainable food if only the wealthy can access it, right?
Yeah. Such a crucial point. Agroecology really emphasizes making healthy, culturally appropriate food available and affordable to everyone, regardless of their income level or location, right? This means supporting local food systems, strengthening connections between producers and consumers, and reducing our reliance on those long, complex supply chains.
Things like farmers markets, community-supported agriculture, and those initiatives that bring fresh, locally grown food directly to communities, especially those in underserved areas.
Great examples. And it's not just about access to the food itself, it's also about access to knowledge, right? And information. Agroecology values community engagement and knowledge sharing. It's about creating spaces where farmers, researchers, consumers, and policymakers can all come together to learn from each other, share experiences, and develop solutions that meet, local needs.
It's about recognizing that everyone has something to contribute,
Yeah.
whether it's traditional knowledge that's been passed down for generations or scientific expertise. I
Uh-huh.
love that agroecology embraces this collaborative approach.
It's about building a movement, a network of people working together to create, a more just and sustainable food system.
So we've laid out those ecological and socioeconomic principles. It's a pretty impressive foundation. But how do those principles actually translate into practice? Our source material introduces this idea of two routes, weak versus strong ecological modernization.
Right. It's a way of understanding all the different approaches to integrating those ecological principles into agriculture. So on one end of the spectrum, we've got weak ecological modernization. That focuses on making these incremental changes within the existing industrial agricultural model.
So it's about tweaking the system, making it a bit more environmentally friendly. But it doesn't really fundamentally challenge those underlying assumptions of that system.
Yeah, you got it. It's about finding ways to reduce the environmental impact of conventional agriculture, but it doesn't necessarily question the reliance on monocultures, or chemical inputs, or large-scale industrial production.
It almost feels like putting a Band-Aid on a much bigger problem.
That's a valid point, and that's where strong ecological modernization comes in. This is a much more transformative approach. It aims to fundamentally redesign agricultural systems based on ecological principles. We're talking about shifting away from monocultures towards those diversified farming systems, reducing or eliminating the use of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, and creating those more localized and resilient food systems.
That sounds both exciting and daunting. I imagine there are trade-offs to consider with each approach.
Absolutely. So weak ecological modernization might be easier to implement in the short term. It often involves adopting specific technologies or practices without overhauling the entire system. But it might not address those root causes of environmental degradation and social inequities within our food systems.
Right. Whereas strong ecological modernization, while it's potentially more effective in the long run, it requires those more fundamental shifts in policies and market structures, even consumer behavior. It's about challenging the status quo, right? And envisioning a completely different way of producing and consuming food.
Exactly, and that's where the real work lies.
Okay, this is already a lot to think about, but I'm excited to delve deeper into these two routes and see how they play out, in real world examples. That's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. Okay, so we've been talking about those two routes, weak versus strong ecological modernization. And I'm really curious to see how they actually play out in the real world. Our source material, Introduction to Agroecology, goes into some really fascinating case studies. They really bring those concepts to life.
It is one thing to talk about those principles abstractly, but to actually see how they're applied, the successes, the challenges, that's where it gets really insightful. And one of the most compelling examples, at least for me, of strong ecological modernization is Sikkim, India.
Sikkim, India. Okay, I'm listening. What's so special about Sikkim?
Well, they did something pretty incredible. They actually transitioned to becoming the first fully organic state in the world.
Oh, yeah, a whole state going organic. That's massive. What would even prompt such a bold move like that?
It was a whole combination of factors. They were dealing with some serious environmental degradation because of the heavy use of, those chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Soil health was declining, water sources were becoming polluted, and there was this real concern about, the long-term impacts on human health.
So it wasn't just like an environmental concern. It was also about the well-being of the people, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And they also recognized, that economic vulnerability of relying on those external inputs, especially for a region with a large population of those smallholder farmers. Organic farming, with its emphasis on, local resources and knowledge, offered a pathway towards, greater self-sufficiency and resilience.
I can imagine, though, that a transition of that scale, that must have been incredibly challenging.
Oh, for sure. It was a multi-year process. It involved a lot of extensive farmer training, the development of those local markets for organic produce, and those policy changes to support the whole transition. They had to address all sorts of issues like access to organic seeds, composting methods, pest and disease management without using, synthetic chemicals. It was a whole system overhaul.
It sounds like they were really committed to making it work.
Yeah.
But did it actually work? Did they see the benefits they were hoping for?
The results, they've been really impressive. Soil health has improved significantly. Biodiversity has increased. And farmers have actually reported, a rise in their incomes, probably because of the higher prices that organic produce commands.
Yeah.
And there's been this noticeable reduction in health issues related to pesticide exposure.
Wow, that's really inspiring. Sikkim's story definitely gives me hope that those large-scale changes are actually possible. But let's be realistic. Most of us aren't in a position to actually influence policy at a state level. So what can we learn from those those more everyday practices of agroecology?
That's where we can look at, those examples that focus on specific farms and projects that have embraced agroecological principles. And one that really stands out for me is the Rodale Institute in the U.S.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them. They're known for their long-term research on organic farming, right?
Yeah, they've been pioneers in regenerative organic agriculture for decades now, and their research has produced some really, really valuable insights. One of their most significant findings, I think, is that those regenerative practices, like cover cropping, composting, crop rotation, all of that can not only restore soil fertility, but also increase biodiversity and sequester carbon from the atmosphere.
So they're actually helping to combat climate change through their farming practices. That's amazing.
That's one of the most exciting aspects of agroecology. By building that healthy soil, we can draw down carbon from the atmosphere, right, and store it in the ground where it belongs. And that healthy soil, like we were talking about earlier, leads to so many other benefits. Healthier plants, healthier animals, and ultimately healthier people.
Right. It's all connected. Speaking of healthy ecosystems, our source material also highlights some incredible work being done in Kenya's Machakos district. What caught your eye about this case study?
The Machakos story is it's really inspiring. It's a region that was once severely degraded because of overgrazing, deforestation, erosion. The land was, literally falling apart.
Wow, that sounds dire.
Yeah.
So how did they turn things around?
Through those, those community-led initiatives focused on agroforestry and soil conservation, they implemented things like terracing hillsides, to prevent that erosion, planting trees alongside crops to improve soil fertility and provide shade, and carefully managing grazing patterns so that the land could regenerate.
It's a good reminder that sometimes those simplest solutions can actually be the most effective.
And what's so remarkable about this is that those initiatives, they weren't imposed from the outside. They were driven by the local communities themselves, who had this deep, deep understanding of the land and its challenges.
Yeah, it sounds like they reclaimed their land.
Yeah,
and they built this more sustainable future for themselves. But did those efforts actually translate into tangible benefits? Did they see improvements in their livelihood?
Oh, absolutely. Crop yields increased, water availability improved because of that better soil water retention, and the overall ecosystem health of the region was revitalized. The Machakos case study really shows how agroecology can empower communities to take control of their own resources and create that more sustainable and prosperous future.
These stories are so encouraging, but I've got to admit, sometimes all this talk about sustainability can feel a bit overwhelming. I want to support all these amazing initiatives, but I also want to, I want to enjoy my food without feeling guilty about every bite.
I think that's a feeling a lot of people can relate to. It's important to remember that agroecology isn't about being perfect. It's about progress. Every step that we take, towards more sustainable choices, no matter how small, makes a difference.
So, what are some practical things that that individuals can do to support agroecology?
Well, there are so many ways to get involved. Honestly, one of the most impactful things I think is supporting your local farmers by buying directly from them at farmers markets or through those community-supported agriculture programs.
I love that. Yeah, you're cutting out the middleman, putting more money in the pockets of the farmers, and you get to enjoy that fresh, locally grown food.
Exactly. And you can also be, more mindful of your food choices at the grocery store. Look for those organic labels. They indicate that the food was produced without synthetic pesticides and fertilizers.
Right. And don't forget about reducing food waste. That's a huge issue that contributes to to all sorts of environmental problems.
Absolutely. We can all make an effort to eat what we buy, compost those food scraps, be more conscious of our consumption patterns.
So it's about making informed choices, I guess, and supporting those initiatives that align with our values.
Yeah, and remembering that every little bit helps. When we support agroecology, we're not just voting with our wallets. We're investing in a future where food is produced in a way that nourishes not just people, but the planet as well.
Well said. Now, our source material, it goes beyond those individual actions. It actually dives into the role of policy and governance in supporting that transition to agroecology. And that's where I think things get really interesting on a systems level.
Yeah, it's where we start to see how we can create, the conditions that enable agroecology to actually uh, flourish on a wider scale.
We've been talking about those individual actions, but it's pretty clear that we need those larger scale changes to really make that shift towards agroecology. And our source material, Introduction to Agroecology, it really dives into that critical role of policy and governance in creating that supportive environment for this kind of transformation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We can't just rely on, individual good intentions. We need those policies that incentivize those sustainable practices and provide financial and technical support for, those farmers that are transitioning to agroecology and create market access for those agroecologically produced goods.
It's about leveling the playing field, right? Because, right now, industrial agriculture, it often benefits from those subsidies and policies that actually work against, agroecological practices.
That's right. Imagine if those subsidies that often go to, those large-scale industrial farms that are really just propping up a system that's really detrimental to the environment,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And to those small-scale farmers. Imagine if all that was redirected to actually support agroecological practices. That would be huge.
Yeah. It's about shifting those priorities and recognizing that investing in agroecology is an investment in a healthier future, right? A more resilient future for everyone.
Mhm.
Are there any good examples of this happening
Yeah.
around the world? Are any countries taking the lead on agroecological policy?
There are definitely some encouraging examples emerging. Our source material mentions Brazil's national policy for agroecology and organic production. It's pretty comprehensive, and it provides that support for those small scale farmers. It promotes organic production, and it fosters research and education in agroecology.
Brazil seems to be, at the forefront of a lot of those sustainability initiatives. What about other regions? Is this trend catching on elsewhere?
Yeah, definitely. The European Union's Common Agricultural Policy, for instance, it's been undergoing some reforms to incorporate those, more of those sustainability measures. Although there's still a lot of debate about, how far those changes will go. And in Latin America, several countries have actually they've developed specific laws to promote and support, those agroecological practices.
It feels like there's this growing global movement recognizing that we can't continue with business as usual when it comes to agriculture. But like we've been talking about, agroecology is also about those grassroots efforts, right? Those community-led initiatives that are really transforming food systems, from the ground up.
Absolutely. Those policies are crucial, but real change, it often starts at that local level. Our handbook highlights the importance of collaborative efforts among all those stakeholders, public-private partnerships, community-based initiatives, farmer researcher collaborations. Those are all crucial to driving change.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by that idea of farmer field schools,
Yeah.
where farmers can actually learn from each other
Yep.
and share their experiences. It's a reminder that knowledge isn't just something that comes from textbooks
Mhm.
or from laboratories. It's also embedded in the lived experiences of those who work the land.
Absolutely. Farmer field schools are such a great example of, participatory learning,
Yeah.
where farmers are active participants in that research and knowledge creation process. And they've been incredibly effective in spreading, those agroecological practices and adapting them to local contexts.
So it's about tapping into that collective wisdom, right? And recognizing that farmers are often the best innovators when it comes to finding those solutions that actually work
Yeah.
in their specific environments.
Exactly. And that brings us back to one of those core principles of agroecology. It's recognizing and valuing the diversity of knowledge and experience that exists within our food systems.
Okay, we've covered a lot here, from those ecological principles to those social and economic aspects, from weak versus strong ecological modernization to the role of policy and community action. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are your final thoughts on the future of agroecology? Are you feeling optimistic?
I do feel a sense of hope. Even amidst, all those daunting challenges that we face, agroecology offers this really compelling pathway towards a more sustainable and just food system. It's a framework that's really rooted in those ecological principles, social justice, and economic viability. It's a system that recognizes that interconnectedness of all living things, and it seeks to create that harmonious relationship between humans and the natural world.
It's about moving beyond that mindset of domination and control, and embracing a more collaborative and regenerative approach.
Exactly, and I think that growing global movement towards agroecology, it's a testament to the power of this vision. More and more people are recognizing that our current food systems they're just unsustainable, and that we need a different way forward.
And it's a journey that requires all of us to participate.
Mhm.
Farmers, consumers, policymakers, researchers, everyone. By embracing the principles of agroecology, we can cultivate a future where food is a source of nourishment, not just for our bodies, but for our communities and our planet.
Well said. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this intricate web of life, and our actions, they have ripple effects far beyond beyond ourselves. By choosing to support agroecology, we're choosing to be part of the solution and creating a world that's healthier, more just, and more sustainable for generations to come.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into agroecology. We hope you found it as inspiring and empowering as we have. And remember, every action, no matter how small it is, it can contribute to that more sustainable and just food system. So until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring all those amazing possibilities of agroecology.